Hello, and welcome to the Purpose Partner Path podcast, where we help women at crossroads rediscover who they are so they can become unshakable and live with strategic grace. I'm your host, Wendy Gladney, and today I'm excited to share a special conversation with my husband, Ron Williams. For this special Valentine's episode, we are going to share some nuggets from his book, The Right Man Business Plan for Women, which I wish I would have read many years ago, but that's a whole nother story. And now, although this podcast is centered around helping women at crossroads rediscover who they are so they can become unshakable and walk with strategic grace, I also believe we can learn from every voice of wisdom that crosses our path, and that includes the men in our lives. So that's why we don't have just women on my show. We also have wonderful men that have nuggets to share. And so today, my husband will give us wisdom to help everyone that will be listening to this podcast. So, as usual, as I always say, let's go dive in and get our cup of tea or our cup of coffee so that we can get ready for a great show.
Exhale, let go, and enjoy the Purpose Partner Podcast.
Okay, are you ready? Honey, before we begin, please share with our audience a little bit about yourself and what made you write the book, The Right Man Business Plan for Women.
Well, first let me say, my wife, you look absolutely beautiful. You look as beautiful as the first day that I ever saw you, and it's just a privilege and a pleasure to be on your show. I'm born and raised on the south side of Chicago, South Side, and have been in business for over 50 years. I've been in the private sector with the sporting goods industry for over 25 years, started my own company for about 15 years, retired, went back into the workplace, worked as the chief of staff for the Human Resource Department for the District of Columbia, retired from that, came back and was the senior advisor to the director of the United States Mint, did that, and currently I am the chief administrative and quality officer for Cheney University of Pennsylvania, which is the oldest and the first HBCU. Now, as you know, I've spent most of my career helping people become better leaders, better decision makers, and I kept seeing this pattern with women that I came across in my personal as well as in my professional life. And because I had two daughters blooming into womanhood, I was concerned because these were incredible women who were strategic about everything. About their careers, about their finance, about their health. But when it came to relationships, they were just hoping it would work out. They made good decisions in the boardroom, bad decisions in the bedroom. So I wrote this book. I wanted to give women the same kind of framework for choosing a partner that they use for any other major decision in their life, because the right man shouldn't be an accident. It should be intentional.
Awesome. That's so true. So true. So with that in mind, and of course, all of us know that when it comes to Valentine's Day, that is like the day that women just can't wait to get flowers and chocolates and all of that. And it can stir reflection and longing and questions and sometimes even disappointment. So with that, one of the questions I would want to ask you is, what would you say to women as relates to all of the emotions that they put into Valentine's Day and thinking that's the only time that they should receive love?
Well, Valentine's Day, similar to holidays, can be very rough on people. It can be tough. And here's what I'd say. If you're single, don't let one day make you feel like you're behind. And if you're in a relationship but feeling, say, disappointed, that's telling you something. Listen to it. But the bigger thing I would say is use this day to get intentional. Ask yourself what you actually want in a partner, because hoping isn't a strategy. Planning is.
That is so true. So let me ask you, how do you define love?
Well, number one, love is a verb. It's an action. So
You do always tell me that. That's for sure.
So fortunately, or unfortunately, a lot of people think it's a noun, it's a thing, and I believe it's an action. It's predicated upon what you do. It's not. A lot of people fall into what a person says, but not necessarily what they do. So I believe it's an action. Now, some people think it's a feeling, and I'm not saying that emotions aren't involved in love because they are. But the reality is, if you think it's a feeling, sometimes you don't feel that you love this person for whatever reason.
Right.
You can feel and fall out of love quickly if it's relied upon just feelings. So I believe it's an action. It is an emotion, and it's a strong feeling. And having been in love with you, I can tell you it'll make you do things you never thought you'd do and go places you never thought you'd go. And a lot of them are good.
And one of the things that I have learned over life is that when it comes to love, you do have to deal with the facts, and like you said, not just the feelings, because feelings can come and go. And if we just rely just on our feelings, we might make some mistakes. We might make some choices that we regret later. But when you rely on the facts in terms of that, I love this person and why you love this person, that when things aren't necessarily going great, including Valentine's Day, you got to hang in there and you got to work on it and make it better. So let me ask you.
Let me add one thing to that.
Okay.
And this is more personal, so I'm not going to say it's a universal thing, but it surely helps when you're in love with someone who's a friend. And the reason I say that is the emotions of love sometimes would because something doesn't go the way you want it to go, and you get so emotional, and you either break up or leave. But if that person is your friend, friends have a tendency to be more forgiving, and sometimes friendship is based upon years and experiences. But the reality is, if you're friends with the person that you love, I think that's paving a smooth road for a sustainable, healthy relationship.
I think that's a good point, because, friends care about each other, and they care about each other even when it's not in the best interest of themselves, but it is for the other person. And so that's a very good point that I think a lot of people need to understand before they even get into a serious relationship that could go to marriage is, are you friends? There's a saying that you always used to say about, if you broke up with that person, would you still be friends?
Yeah, the question that you refer, or the statement you're referring to, if he wasn't your man, would he still be your friend?
Exactly. And that's a good point.
And I think that's a question that people should ask themselves in a relationship is, if this person wasn't your significant other, would they somehow still be in your life because they're your friend?
And they're good people and they mean the best for you. And that's really important. So let me ask you this. What have you observed about successful women and the challenges that they face today when it comes to romance?
Well, as I stated earlier, because I've seen incredible women who make very good strategic decisions everywhere except in their relationships. Successful women have a tendency to plan their careers, they manage their money, but when it comes to choosing a man, sometimes they're operating on hope, chemistry, emotions, feelings, not facts, not analytics, not data. And the biggest thing, they try to fix men. And they see potential and think, I can help him grow. But you can't date potential. You have to date reality.
Yes.
And the other thing is they ignore red flags because they don't want to fail at relationships. But staying in the wrong relationship isn't success. Walking away is. And, in my book, I talk about 4 different type of women. And one of the is what I call the Florence Nightingale syndrome, where, this is a person who is a natural nurturer and has a tendency to being drawn to broken men, emotionally unavailable men, damaged men, and they believe that they can fix this person. And I told my daughters very clearly that your job isn't to fix a flawed man. Your job is to leave him. So anyway, But successful women, like I say, they're very strategic in their careers, their finances, their health. But when it comes to relationships, they rely upon things that they don't rely upon in business.
Mm-hmm. You know, there's one of the things I was just thinking about as you were sharing, and when I think about your book, The Right Man Business Plan for Women, and you talk about how to take a business-minded approach towards relationships, and just kind of reflecting on what you just said. One of the things, for example, is when we don't get the right data. So we're scared to ask somebody for their credit report, or do you file your taxes, or, there's certain things that we're scared to ask, but there's things that we need to know. Now, I know we can't depend on just those things, but when we don't go into a relationship, really understanding where that person really is. And I have to throw this in there. I would say, especially as we get older and they're blended relationships, that means there was other families or another marriage, because you got to know what you're walking into. So with that in mind, what advice would you give a woman to take a business-minded approach, but without losing the romance and their heart?
Well, the name of the book is The Right Man Business Plan. So what the book it really is designed to do is to help you create a plan. And part of that plan is what I call your due diligence. If in business you were going to, say, acquire a different company or merge with another company, you would do what we say is due diligence. You would check the books. You would make everything that you would expect in relationship to that particular business is in alignment with what your expectations are. But when we go into relationships, we don't do the same due diligence with our heart. We're willing to invest our money and do all the things to make sure we don't lose that, but we don't take that same effort and energy when it comes to our heart. We don't do our due diligence. We meet a man, we introduce him to our family, our children if you have them, where you work, where you live. You know nothing about this man. You haven't done any due diligence. You don't know if he's a criminal. You don't know if he's had a history of violence on women. You haven't done your due diligence. But yet, because it's your heart, you're willing to invest in a person without doing your due diligence. And you wouldn't do that with your money or your business, but you do it with your personal relationships.
There's another saying you talk about, like, you have to inspect what you expect.
Absolutely. You have to inspect what you inspect what you expect. In business, if you expect people to do their job or hold them accountable, you've got to inspect that. It's the same thing with the person that you're willing to give your life, your heart, your time, your energy, and you got to do your due diligence, because romance without intention is just infatuation. And infatuation fades. But when you're intentional about who you choose, that's when you build something that lasts. And this is what we're talking about in the book. We're talking about healthy relationships, healthy and sustainability, things that last.
Yes.
And when it comes to, part of this book is an opportunity, if you're not a business person, to get a very strong foundation in fundamentals and entrepreneurial skills in relationship to business. As an example, if you were going to go into business, you'd have to have what we call a structure. And I show in the book, and I compare the structure in business to romance. As an example, there's 4 structures in business, and I apply them to romance. Number 1, a sole proprietor. This is a person who owns the business by themselves. In romance, that would be a person who's single looking to mingle, okay? Mm-hmm. The second one is a partnership. This is where you go into business with another person or other people. In romance, that would be similar to a committed relationships, where you both realize that this is something we want to work on. We're going to be monogamous. And then the third one is what we call an LLC. It's a limited liability corporation. Now, the limited liability corporation is different from a corporation. It looks like it, but it's different. In romance, that would be living together. You want to look like you're married, but you don't want to have the same responsibilities of marriage. And that's what an LLC does. And then the fourth one would be a corporation, which in romance would be a marriage. Now, the thing about it is, and why it's important for women to understand what their structure is, because if you're a corporation and you're out here dating sole proprietors, it's not a good match.
Oh, it's never going to work because you guys, you're not equally yoked. You're not on the same page.
Right.
So let me keep our conversation going here about our show deals with helping women at crossroads. What advice would you give to any of our women listening on whether they should stay or leave if they're in a situation, they're at a crossroad and they're having, say, doubts, but they're not married yet. They're dating and they're not sure.
Well, the interesting thing about that is it's a trap. It can be a trap. Women start asking, they should start asking, do I have somebody, instead of, is this person good for me? They're more focused on, I have somebody. But your question is this person good for you? So when you're at that crossroad, you got to identify, is this person really right for me? Status is about optics. Health is about reality. A healthy relationship is about reality. I'd rather have someone, and I'm speaking for my children or our children, I'd rather have them be single and at peace than coupled and miserable.
Yeah.
Now, if you're at a crossroad about whether to stay or leave, it's tough to give people advice, especially when I wrote my book for single women, and I was at a book signing, and a woman came in, and she said, I drove a long way to see you when I heard you're going to be here. She said, I read your book and I divorced my husband. Now, I said, ma'am, if you notice it earlier, no, she says, no. I'm just congratulating you for giving me the courage to do that. But anyway, here's what I say when it comes to should I stay or should I leave? You should ask yourself 3 questions. The first question is this relationship making me better or just less lonely? Is it making me better or just less lonely? The second question is, the issues that we're having, are they fixable, or am I hoping he'll change into someone he's not? And then the third one is, if nothing changed within the relationship, could you live like this, say, for the next 5 years?
Those are some very good questions for people to have to ponder. And, again, this is our Valentine's special. And so I want to say, on a day like Valentine's, what does being unshakable mean when it comes to being more concerned about your health, your relationship health, than the status, like you're saying? Because most people are just hurrying for a date, a calendar date. I want to get married, or I want this, or I want that. But they're not really looking at their health, their relationship health.
Right. Well, and let me say something I wanted to say on the previous question.
Okay.
When you're in a relationship and it's been, for say a serious amount of time, leaving is hard. And I don't want to sound like I'm callous or hard-hearted, because I'm not. But staying in the wrong relationship is harder. It's harder. Don't waste your years hoping he or she will get better.
Well, let me stop you for a second. I got to ask you this question. So if we're talking, because sometimes it's a difference between if you're talking about people dating versus somebody who's married. And if we're talking about somebody who's married, but they're also a Christian, I mean, how do we help them? How do we deal with that? How do we share about love or the lack thereof that they're not feeling, but they're trying to walk the Christian walk?
Well, I that's a very fine line, and when it comes to those things, that's between them and their God, and there's been many Christians in history that have been divorced. There's many pastors preaching today in the pulpit that have been divorced on multiple occasions. Now, if you follow, the word, obviously the Lord does not necessarily advocate divorce, but I'm not necessarily saying that he would want you to be, and there are certain things that within the Bible state that, divorce is okay based upon adultery or those types of things. But that's a very sticky wicket, and I personally would let a person have to deal with their God on that particular situation.
Okay, so let's move to this question. How do you feel that strategic grace then shows up in communication, conflict, and commitment in relationships?
What happened to Unshakable? I didn't talk about Unshakable.
You didn't finish that? Okay, I'm sorry. Go back to Unshakable.
I wanted to go back because I wanted to talk about leaving is hard.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But when it comes to being unshakable, that's a very, very tough question when it comes to relationships. Clarity is missing because most women have never been taught to define what they actually need in a relationship. So when we talk about unshakable, it can be difficult. And I think when you talk about being unshakable from the standpoint of communication, and there's different things that you can be unshakable in. But one thing is, you should never let another person make you feel less than what and who you are.
I agree.
And you have to be unshakable on the foundation and the fundamentals of the things that are valued in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to take a stand. And, sometimes when it comes to our hearts, we take a seat when we should have took a stand.
Yes.
And you have to be unshakable when it comes to your values. You have to be unshakable when it comes to non-negotiable things in your life. There's certain things that you will not compromise regardless of who it is, regardless of what they're asking you. You have to stay the course. And, being both of us as Christians, we like to say that the walk and our testimony is something that we need to be unshakable about.
No, I agree. Absolutely. And I think, like you mentioned previously, in that sometimes, we don't even know what our values, our convictions, or our core, things are. We really don't. We haven't sat down long enough to really think it through. We've kind of just gone through life, but we haven't really dealt with that. And so, now segueing over to the strategic grace, just because of our time, I want to know from you, how does strategic grace show up as relates to how couples can communicate, deal with conflict, and stay committed?
Right. Well, strategic grace is powerful because really it's the balance being strong and being kind. Now, here's how it can show up in relationships. In communication, you say what needs to be said, but you say it with care. You say it with kindness. You say it with compassion, but you don't avoid it. So
I agree.
When you talk about, you don't want your words to be weapons. You don't want to weaponize your words, and people will never forget what you said. But you have to be honest, and you can be honest without being harsh. So,
I agree.
So I think when it comes to communication, strategic grace comes into play. But also, same thing in business. When you get in conflict, you don't really need to fight to win. You fight to resolve. And when you have strategic grace, you have to stay grounded. And for Christians, it's easier because part of the grounding is the word. But you don't want to blow things up or shut things down. You address the issue without attacking the person. That's really grace under pressure.
Yes.
And then the last thing, the first thing I stated was communication. The second thing is conflict. And then the last thing that I would say is probably commitment. You have to show up consistently when you're with strategic grace, but you don't sacrifice yourself. You're loyal, but not at the expense of your own well-being.
Yes.
So you give, but you also require reciprocity. if you're giving 100% and somebody's giving 10%, that's not going to work. So strategic grace means you lead with your head and your heart. You're always going to be, when it comes to strategic grace, intentional, and you're not cold-hearted, but you're loving, but you're not a doormat either.
Yeah. And one of the things when I think about commitment, and especially like when I think about our relationship and, what we've committed to each other, is there's certain things that you'll never say to hurt each other on purpose. Now, you may say something that the other person doesn't like, but if you're not saying it to hurt them, and then also like where words like divorce is off the table. That's not even something that is considered, because then that makes a relationship very rocky. It's like you're committed to figuring this out, even if it's uncomfortable. You're committed to working through the situation together. And so for me, that's when I'm thinking about the word commitment, is we're committed because it's a choice.
And let me just say, from the standpoint of what, if you read the book, what you'll walk away with, what people will walk away is that love is not for the weak. Okay?
Yeah.
And when I say that, love requires courage. It requires courage to be seen, to expose yourself, to take risk, and to walk away from anything that does not serve you. It takes courage to do that. Yeah. And so, love, you have to own your own power.
I understand.
You have to define your own worth. You've got to refuse to settle for less.
No, I agree.
Less than what you deserve.
Okay, with that, what are your closing thoughts for our listeners today?
Well, there's a lot of things. I think, unfortunately, today, when it comes to love, a lot of women are being navigated and guided by fear. Okay? And I want to talk about, and I know we are running out of time, so I want to hit these, but I hope if you get an opportunity to go to the website, ronaldwilliams.info, you have an opportunity to purchase the book. But I want to talk about the 5 fears that women deal with. Number 1 is the fear of rejection. Number 2, the fear of being alone. Number 3 is the fear of failure. And number 4 is the fear of exposure, taking that mask off. And then the last one is fear of commitment. But here's what I want every woman listening to know. You are not asking for too much. You're not being too picky. You're not unrealistic for wanting a man who has what I call the 4 C's. And I want you to, take this down. If you need to write, go get a pen. Number 1 is compatibility. Number 2 is chemistry. Number 3 is character. And number 4 is commitment. So those are 4 things that you need to look for a man. And those aren't fairy tale standards. That's the foundation of a healthy relationship. So whether you're single, in a relationship, or at a crossroads, here's my challenge. Stop hoping. Start planning. Stop being accidental. Start being more intentional. Get clear on what you want. Know what your non-negotiables are, and don't settle just because you're tired of waiting or afraid of being alone.
Couldn't have said it any better. And I just want to speak to every woman who's listening that no matter what season of love you're in, if you're happily partnered, may today remind you to love with intention and not routine. If you're rebuilding, or if you're healing, or if you're waiting for someone, may today remind you that you're still whole just the way you are. And if you're standing at a crossroads, unsure of what's next, let this Valentine's Day be different. Let it be a day where you choose clarity over confusion, which is part of what I believe my husband was sharing. Clarity over confusion, alignment over anxiety, and intention over impulse. Because love, real love, is not rushed. It is built. It is chosen. And it is sustained with purpose, with power, and with grace. And most of all, learn to love yourself first. And this Valentine's Day, may you just feel loved from the top to the bottom because God made you on purpose. And may you lead your life and all your relationships with love. So, babe, I could say Ron, but babe, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. And as your wife, I am proud to be your partner in life. And I want to let everyone know, if you're interested in his books, you can go to ronwilliams.info, or you can just contact me. And I know how I have a connection. I can make sure that you can get his book. Okay. So thank you again for joining us. If anything we said today touches something positive for you, or you feel like someone else could, just benefit from hearing what was shared today, please share this podcast and follow me on my social media at Wendy Gladney. And that's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And if you go over to my website and you subscribe, you'll get a boatload of free downloads. So again, we thank you so much for joining us today. I am happy to be your purpose partner. And until the next time, I'm your host, Wendy Gladney, and my special guest was my wonderful husband, Ron Williams. God bless.
Happy
Bye-bye.
Valentine's Day.
Exhale, let go, and enjoy the purpose, partner.